If you're done with Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities and want to delve into yet another horror-centric anthology series, we've got just the right shows for you. These shows resemble, in some way or another, del Toro's style. Although not every series is entirely horror-based, each of them has its own uniquely distorted and thrilling worlds of their own to explore. Let's explore 7 TV shows like Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities. At number 8, The Twilight Zone. Already a popular format, Rod Serling perfected the art of anthology television with his show The Twilight Zone. There's a reason this show still influences the storytellers of this day and age. It's brilliantly made, and although not every episode is a masterpiece, most of them are, which makes it remain at the forefront of public memory. Each episode has a story of its own with some element of the fantastic. The episodes go from classic science fiction with rocket ships, aliens, and robots to darker fantasy with a diner that has an error-free fortune-telling machine or a reality-controlling child, all the way to lighter and sweeter episodes with a self-revealing town for desperate travelers and people going back in time to their childhood home. Beautiful, isn't it? Despite the fact that the series aired in 1959, it's still relevant even over half a century later. At number 6, The Outer Limits. Initially a collection of one-hour sci-fi monster movies, The Outer Limits is a black and white series from the early 60s which was way ahead of its time. Yes, it was way ahead of its time because they didn't have enough budget to actually execute the concepts they had. But the stories were so well written that it helped the show reach out of its limitations. The series might not be as popular as A Twilight Zone, but it quite made a mark of its own. Alan Moore's comic and Zack Snyder's film, Watchmen, features direct references to the show's episode, The Architects of Fear. Due to the considerable similarity, James Cameron's The Terminator has so many resemblances to the episodes Demon with a Glass Hand and Soldier that James Cameron had to give credits to Harlan Ellison in his film. A show with that much influence is worth watching, don't you think? At number 6, Hammer House of Horror. The bored audience of Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi got something new with Hammer films, with their classic monsters in vibrant and violent colors and underlying blood and which got rid of old gothic horror settings during the 50s, 60s, and 70s. The studio revived the genre so successfully that Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing gained the same ranks as their predecessors from the 30s and 40s. By executing the same formula in television, the 1980 series from UK network ITV Hammer House of Horror was conceived. Not having the advantage of big screens to turn red, they had to shift their focus to make their stories more intimate and modern. The show had only 12 episodes, but had the same element of dark, violence, and perverseness, just as their silver screen counterparts. What makes the show relevant for today's audience is the use of the places like everyday homes, same as a contemporary audience rather than the grimy old castles or grubby laboratories. The show connected on a psychological level with the audience due to its horror from the past, in the present, and familiar world. If you like Del Toro's Crimson Peak, you will definitely love Hammer films too. At number 5, we have Monsters. If you're a fan of Del Toro, you'd know his love for monsters. By watching his movies and TV shows, it's obvious that the guy's obsessed with monsters, right? And he even openly discusses it. Instead of usual human characters, his protagonists are monsters who are more interesting than the human characters and who even sometimes have their romance going on. So if you're also a fan of monsters like Del Toro, you must watch Monsters. Somewhat, but not entirely like Tales from the Dark Side, Monsters have humans interacting with alienating characters that are simply beyond our understanding. And by the way, both shows have the same producer, Richard P. Rubenstein. From where the monsters are taken is not quite clear. They could be little different versions of old legends or classic depiction modernized for the 20th century, or simply just man-made variety. Despite the fact that anthology series had a revival in the 80s, the studios weren't funding enough for them, because of which the show's productions were odd and weak. So is the case with Monsters, and if you can look past the horrific production value, which you should, you'll have a blast with fun and often ridiculous series. Moving on to number 4, we have Night Gallery. Although a work from Rod Serling, Night Gallery is not as good as Twilight Zone, and there are a few reasons for that. Firstly, the aesthetics. Hairstyles, clothing, set design, all of it makes it so 70s that it somehow looks older than the show that came 10 years before it. Then came the format. With 2 stories in an episode instead of just 1, it makes it hard to keep track of the plot and character developments. And to top it off, the studio didn't allow Serling to have complete control over the show and meddled with it, which prevented the show from reaching its true potential. Despite all that, Serling did a great job of gothic horror. Every story doesn't necessarily have to question human nature. Most of them focus on the dreadful aura which inhabits the minds of the viewers and lives off there to scare them, all in an attempt to give the viewers something that hasn't scared them before. These experiments don't always go successful, but they should be appreciated. Just like the pilot episode Eyes, directed by Steven Spielberg and starring Joan Crawford, which revolves around an eye transplant gone wrong, or The Caterpillar, with an earworm which does quite literally what its name suggests. These stories can make home in your mind and remind you of their presence when the lights go off. And number 3, we have the Ray Bradbury Theater. Although The Martian Chronicles and Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury were masterpieces that helped develop and revive the sci-fi genre, these novels were just a mere reflection of the writer's creative intuition and his true potential. For a prolific writer like Bradbury, anything could and should be a story, and every idea that popped into his head could become a story. And he did exactly that. Terrifying horror stories, gripping mysteries, heartbreaking memoirs, and even absurd comedies. He did everything so brilliantly. Bradbury's lyrical style could be a little difficult to adapt, but luckily the man himself took up the task with the series, The Ray Bradbury Theater. You'll get to know everything about the plot from the intro to the series. This show is literally Bradbury's thoughts on paper. And we have Masters of Horror at number 2. After getting the creative independence from the studio, John Carpenter set himself loose and saw where it could take him. Master of Horror is definitely a show that any Del Toro fan can get behind. After Prince of Darkness, Cigarette Burns is quite comfortably the darkest, meanest, and most disturbing episode that shows an image of a trapped angel whose wings have been severed from its body, which truly depicts the style of Del Toro films. Homecoming is the best work of satire with a bunch of zombie soldiers, and truly mind-troubling episodes like Imprint and Audition are the masterpieces of torture cinema. There are stories that may not make much sense, but there are episodes that truly grasp your mind and leave an impact on your mood for days. But you can take the risk if you're into exploring new stuff, right? And at number 1, we have Black Mirror. It wouldn't be wrong to call Black Mirror a modern-day version of The Twilight Zone because it gets about as close as possible to doing the job. Charlie Brooker has always managed to tell the hard-hitting moral stories that leave the audience in a moral dilemma, and that is exactly what he did with his show. As the title suggests, Brooker truly held up a dark mirror to his audience by presenting them the dark side of our future with ever-increasing advancement in technology, and what is truly amazing is that some of the ideas presented in the series are not so far off in the future because we can see them happening in some way or another even now. The episode Nosedive depicts the horrifying reality of people's obsession with their social media status. Shut Up and Dance will have you questioning the use of the internet by instilling the fear of hacking of your phones and computers. And the show has much darker episodes. But there are some hopeful stories like San Junipero that offer an optimistic side of technology's ability to bring people together. This modern-day anthology series is a work of genius and bound to inspire storytellers for generations to come. That's a wrap for this video. Which of these series are on your watch list? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.